The phone call came on a Tuesday in May 1995. Dean Martin was sitting in his den, staring at a television that wasn't turned on. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Just sitting, just staring, just waiting for the day to end so he could go to bed and not sleep. When the phone rang, he almost didn't answer. He'd stopped answering most calls months ago, but something made him reach for it. Muscle memory, maybe, or the faint hope that it might be someone he actually wanted to talk to. Yeah, Dino, it's Frank. Dean closed his eyes. Of course it was Frank. Frank Sinatra didn't give up. Never had. Probably never would. Hey, Pally? Frank's voice sounded older than Dean remembered. They hadn't spoken in almost 6 months. Not since Dean had stopped returning calls, stopped going to dinners, stopped pretending he was still part of the world. How you feeling? I'm here, Dean said, which wasn't really an answer, but it was all he had. Listen, I got something I want to talk to you about. Frank paused. Dean could hear him taking a breath, gathering himself. I'm putting together a show, one last thing. Me, you, maybe we get someone else. Like the old days, just one more time. Dean didn't respond immediately. He was looking at a photograph on the table next to his chair. Him and Frank and Sammy, 1963, the Sands, all of them young and bulletproof and convinced the party would never end. Dean, you there? I'm here. So what do you think? One more show, for old time's sake. Don Martin was 77 years old. His lungs barely worked anymore. Emphysema from 50 years of cigarettes. He couldn't walk from his bedroom to his kitchen without getting winded. The idea of standing on a stage for 2 hours was absurd. But that wasn't why he was going to say no. Frank, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you're too old. You're too tired. You can't do it anymore. But Dean, we're all old. We're all tired. That's not the point. What is the point? Frank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, vulnerable. The point is, I miss you, Pally. I miss being on stage with you. I miss the way we used to make people laugh. I miss. He stopped. I just miss you. Dean felt something crack in his chest. A small thing, like ice breaking. Frank, I can't or won't. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Can't means you want to, but you're not able. Won't means you're choosing not to. So which is it? Dean looked at the photograph again. 3 men who thought they'd live forever. 2 of them were already dead. Sammy had died 5 years ago. Cancer. Dean had gone to the funeral, sat in the back, left before anyone could talk to him. Won't, Dean said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Dean could feel Frank processing it, could imagine his face, that flash of hurt before the anger set in. You won't. That's right. After everything, after 40 years, you won't do this one thing for me. Dean's hand tightened on the phone. Frank, don't what? Don't ask you to be my friend? Don't ask you to remember what we had, what we were. We're not those people anymore. So what? We pretend for 2 hours. That's what we've always done. That's what we're good at. And there it was, the thing Dean couldn't say to Frank, couldn't explain, because Frank Sinatra still believed in the performance. Still believed that if you put on the tuxedo and sang the songs and told the jokes, everything else would fall into place. But Dean had learned something different. He'd learned that the performance was a lie, and he was done lying. I can't pretend anymore, Frank. What are you talking about? Dean stood up slowly, his back protesting. He walked to the window. Outside, Los Angeles was bright and busy, and full of people who still had reasons to get out of bed in the morning. You remember what you said to me in 1988, after I walked off the tour? Frank didn't answer. You said I was giving up. You said I was letting people down. You said if I loved you and Sammy, I'd finish the tour. Dean, that was 7 years ago. You were right. I was giving up. But not on you, not on Sammy. I was giving up on the pretending, on being Dean Martin, when Dean Martin had stopped existing 8 years earlier. What the hell does that mean? Dean's voice was steady, empty. It means my son died in 1987, and I died with him. Everything after that has just been me going through the motions, playing the part. But I'm tired, Frank. I'm so goddamn tired of pretending I'm still here when I'm not. The line went quiet. Dean could hear Frank breathing, could hear the sound of ice in a glass. Frank was drinking. Of course he was drinking. "So that's it," Frank said finally. "You're just done? You're gonna sit in your house and wait to die?" "Pretty much. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard." Dean almost laughed. "Selfish? Yeah, probably. What about the people who love you? What about your kids? What about me? My kids have their own lives. They don't need me playing pretend to make them feel better. And you," Dean paused. "Frank, you've been my best friend for 40 years, but you've never understood this about me. I'm not like you. I don't need the stage. I don't need the applause. I needed my son, and he's gone, so everything else is just noise." Frank's voice cracked, just slightly. "So you're telling me to go to hell?" "I'm telling you I can't give you what you're asking for. I don't have it anymore." "One show, Dean. 2 hours. That's all I'm asking." "I know what you're asking, and I know why." Dean closed his eyes. "You want proof that we're still us, that we're still the Rat Pack, that we're still young and cool and untouchable. But Frank, we're not. We're old men pretending we're not dying, and I don't want to spend my last months pretending. So what do you want?" Dean thought about it. Really thought about it. What did he want? "I want to sit in my house and watch old westerns. I want to eat dinner at the same restaurant at the same time every night. I want to not have to perform for anyone, not even you." Frank made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. "You know what your problem is, Dean? You never knew how to fight." "Maybe not, but I know how to let go." "Is that what this is? Letting go?" "Yeah, Pally, that's exactly what this is." Another long silence. Dean waited. He knew Frank well enough to know there was more coming. Frank Sinatra didn't give up without one more swing. "If you do this, if you say no to me right now, we're done. You understand that? I can't forgive this." Dean's voice was soft. "I know. I mean it, Dean. I won't call again. I won't come by. You'll be alone." "I'm already alone, Frank." He heard Frank take a sharp breath, then the sound of a glass slamming down on a table. "You stubborn son of a bitch." "Yeah, I hope you're happy with your choice." "I'm not happy, but I'm honest, and right now, that's all I've got left." Frank hung up without saying goodbye. The dial tone buzzed in Dean's ear for several seconds before he set the phone down. He stood there by the window for a long time, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Frank Sinatra was pouring another drink and cursing Dean's name. Somewhere out there, people were still performing, still pretending, still believing that if you sang loud enough and smiled wide enough, the darkness couldn't touch you. But Dean knew better. He'd spent his entire career making it look easy. The singing, the comedy, the charm, all of it effortless, all of it cool. But the truth was, it had never been easy. Every performance had cost him something. Every smile had been borrowed from reserves he didn't have. And after Dino died, those reserves ran out. Dean walked back to his chair and sat down. The photograph of him and Frank and Sammy was still there, still frozen in 1963, still promising a future that never came. He picked it up and looked at it for a long moment, then he set it face down on the table. In the days that followed, Dean waited for Frank to call back. He knew Frank, knew how he operated. Frank would stew for a few days, maybe a week, and then he'd call and they'd argue, and eventually they'd find a way to laugh about it. That's how it had always worked. But the phone didn't ring. Dean's daughter, Diana, came by a few days later. She could tell something was wrong. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Dean shrugged, had a conversation with Frank. Didn't go well. Dana sat down across from him. "What happened?" "He wanted me to do a show. I said no. And he's mad? He's done. Said he wouldn't call again." Dana was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe him?" Dean nodded. "Yeah, I do." "Are you going to call him?" No. Take stead. "Vonya, listen to me. I love Frank. He's been my best friend for 40 years, but I can't give him what he wants, and I can't pretend I can." "What does he want?" "He wants me to be Dean Martin again. The guy from the stage, the guy who made everything look easy. But that guy doesn't exist anymore. He died with Dino. What's left is just me, and I'm not enough for Frank." Diana's eyes filled with tears. "You're enough for me." Dean reached out and took her hand. "I know, sweetheart. But you're not asking me to perform, you're letting me be tired. Frank can't do that, it's not in his nature. So you're really going to let him go? Dean was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm not letting him go, he's letting me go. There's a difference. The weeks turned into months. Summer came. Dean's health continued to decline. His lungs got worse. His energy faded. He stopped going to restaurants, stopped leaving the house at all except for doctor's appointments. And Frank didn't call. Dean heard through mutual friends that Frank was hurt, angry, that he'd told people Dean had betrayed him, that after everything they'd been through, Dean had chosen to walk away. But that wasn't how Dean saw it. He hadn't walked away. He'd just stopped walking towards something that didn't exist anymore. In November, Dean's doctor told him his emphysema was acute. He had months, maybe less. Dean nodded. He'd known it was coming, had felt it in the way his body was slowly shutting down. Do you want me to call anyone? The doctor asked. Family? Friends? Dean thought about it. My kids, that's all. What about Frank Sinatra? I know you two were close. Dean shook his head. He doesn't want to hear from me. Are you sure? I'm sure. But late at night, alone in his house, Dean wondered if he'd made a mistake, wondered if he should have said yes to that one last show, wondered if Frank was right, if he was being selfish by choosing honesty over comfort. But then he'd remember what it felt like to stand on stage in 1988, singing songs he didn't mean, making jokes he didn't find funny, pretending to be alive when he felt dead inside. And he knew he'd made the right choice. Some people thought Dean Martin gave up after his son died, that he surrendered to grief and let it consume him. But that wasn't true. Dean didn't give up. He just stopped fighting for things that didn't matter. And the only thing that had ever really mattered was Dino. Everything else, the fame, the money, the performances, even the friendships, were just echoes of a life he'd lived before March 21st, 1987. On December 25th, 1995, Dean Martin died in his home. Alone by choice, his children had visited earlier in the day. He'd told them he loved them, told them he was tired, told them it was okay to let go. Frank Sinatra got the news on Christmas night. According to people who were there, he didn't say anything, just sat down heavily in his chair and stared at nothing. 2 days later, Frank released a statement. Dean was my brother. I loved him. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life. But privately, Frank told friends he'd never forgiven Dean for that phone call in May, for refusing to do one last show, for choosing to fade away instead of going out fighting. He gave up, Frank said, and I can't forgive him for that. But Frank missed the point. Dean hadn't given up. He'd let go. And there's a difference. Giving up means you had something worth fighting for, and you stopped fighting. Letting go means you fought until there was nothing left to fight for, and then you accepted it. Dean Martin fought for 33 years after his career started, fought to be taken seriously as an actor, fought to break free from Jerry Lewis's shadow, fought to build something real beneath the cool facade, and he fought for 8 years after his son died. Fought to keep breathing when every breath felt like betrayal, fought to keep living when living felt like a lie. But in May 1995, Dean stopped fighting. Not because he was weak, because he was done. Frank Sinatra wanted one more performance, one more show, one more chance to prove they were still the kings. But Dean knew the truth. They weren't kings. They were old men clinging to crowns that didn't fit anymore. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take off the crown and walk away. The tragedy of Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra's final conversation wasn't that their friendship ended. It's that they both loved each other enough to break each other's hearts. Frank loved Dean enough to want him to keep living, to keep performing, to keep being the man he remembered. And Dean loved Frank enough to tell him the truth. That man was gone, and no amount of performing could bring him back. In his final months, Dean never called Frank, and Frank never called Dean. Two men who'd shared 40 years of friendship ended with silence. Some people said it was pride. Others said it was stubbornness. But the truth was simpler and sadder. They loved each other. They just couldn't save each other, and neither of them knew how to accept that. Dean Martin died believing he'd made the right choice, that honesty was better than performance, that letting go was braver than holding on. Frank Sinatra died 2 years later, still angry that Dean had refused, still hurt that his best friend had chosen silence over one last song. Neither of them was wrong. They were just asking different questions. Frank asked, "Don't we owe the world one more show?" Den answered, "What do we owe ourselves?" And the space between those questions was where their friendship ended. Not with a fight, not with betrayal, just with two old men who'd run out of ways to meet each other halfway. The phone call in May 1995 lasted 11 minutes. It ended a friendship that had survived fame, divorce, addiction, loss, and 4 decades of Hollywood chaos. But it couldn't survive the truth. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that Dean said no, but that saying no was the most honest thing he'd said to Frank in 8 years, and Frank couldn't forgive him for it.